Mansfield today, it's a Monday morning, and as usual on a Monday, we take a look at business first, brought to you by Capital Legacy, your one provider of wills and estate administration. As usual, business journalist Chris Gibbons joins us. He joins us from Germany. We'll get onto that a little bit later, because Chris, there's a busy schedule this morning with a look at, there's been a big local resignation, a court ruling which has left the mining houses smiling. We're also going to be talking to legendary scenario planner Clem Sunter about his new book. But let's start with a look at the international scene. Several big stories making headlines over the last week. Interest rates both here and in the US. And tell us about this company called Evergrande, why it's so important.
Jeremy, a very good morning to you. Yes, Evergrande is the biggest property company in China, responsible for the hundreds and hundreds of tower blocks containing flats for China's emerging middle class. But Evergrande has found itself in difficulty recently, running out of cash. And it's moved from borrowing from banks to borrowing from its own retail customers, as in, if you buy a flat from me, I'll give you a Gucci handbag. That kind of deal. The company owes over 300 billion US dollars, and a big payment on part of that was due last Thursday. Several reports say the payment did not happen. No reaction yet, though, from the players involved.
Okay, but that may all be very sad for Evergrande, but how does that affect us here in South Africa?
Well, it does quite a lot, in fact. First, there's the big picture, because if Evergrande collapses and defaults on its debt, that is a big enough shock to take down the rest of China's highly indebted property sector. In other words, this could be what some are calling China's Lehman moment, a reference to the collapse in 2008 of Lehman Brothers in New York, which of course triggered the Great Recession. Now, we're just emerging from the economic aftermath of the pandemic. Really, we do not need another series of economic blows. But second, the broader tech squeeze in China has hurt us as individual South Africans. The drop in value of the internet giant Tencent has hit Naspers, which in turn would have hurt your and my pension funds. And third, of course, a scaling back of construction in China has already seen a drop in iron ore and coal exports from this country to China. So yes, what happens in Beijing is very definitely felt on the streets of Johannesburg and Cape Town.
Well, let's stay with China then, because they've been making quite a lot of headlines, especially in the crackdown on cryptocurrencies.
Absolutely. C is for China, C is for crackdown at the moment. Beijing's been moving against crypto for some time, even though much of modern crypto mining takes place in the western part of China. And on Friday, the People's Bank of China issued a statement declaring all crypto-related transactions in China illegal. And that includes services provided by offshore exchanges. Bitcoin down 6%, Ether down 10%.
But why? What's behind this, Chris?
Jeremy, I think there are two related factors. First, Bitcoin was originally designed to be beyond the reach of governments. Now, we know very well that nothing must ever be beyond the control of the Chinese Communist Party. And second, China itself is also planning to introduce its own state-controlled digital currency, the e-yuan. Like all good communists, you deal with competition by shutting it down.
Okay, let's look at the story on interest rates. No change here nor in the US. Wasn't that what we were expecting? So what's the story?
Yes, but as always, Jeremy, it's not just what was said, but how it was said. US Fed Chair Jay Powell confirmed that US interest rates would stay at record lows. He also indicated that 9 of the 18 members of the Fed's Open Markets Committee were now in favor of starting to taper the massive bond buying program, probably as early as November of this year. Also, the US interest rates would start rising, likely in the middle of next year. That was just enough to lay out a clear path ahead for investors and not enough to spook them. It's a very fine balance. Commentators are saying Jay Powell got it exactly right.
And locally?
Well, locally, Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago did something similar. He also left South African interest rates at their record low. He added the US Fed's decision had not been a factor, but would be monitored by his team to assess its impact. And a strong hint that the course of our interest rates, sometime maybe much later this year, November, somewhere around there, early next year, would likely be up. Solid, cautious, controlled words, exactly what markets want from central bank governors.
And a big resignation, as we mentioned earlier, which could be seen as part of the brain drain.
Very much so. Click's CEO Vikesh Ramsunder has quit after just 3 years in the hot seat to jet off to Australia to head up a listed company there. We don't know which one just yet. Ramsunder, I think, has done a very good job at Click's. It wasn't something of a rut until he joined. Just the kind of skilled executive that South Africa does not need to lose right now. He'll be replaced, though, by Bertina Engelbrecht, who becomes the first black female to lead a listed retailer in this country.
And a court decision which made the mining industry very happy.
Now, this is the one about the ruling that once a mining company is empowered, it's always empowered. What does that mean? Why is it important? Well, roll back the years a bit, back to when BEE was introduced. The mining companies were, in essence, told to make sure they had black partners to the value of 25%. Deals were done, partners were brought in, more deals are done. A few years later, the share prices have gone up. The partners want to cash in their investments. So more deals are done again, and the partners exit, clutching some cash. That's what happens. That's the way business is done, no problem. But the time comes for the mining houses to renew their licenses. And suddenly government says, hold on, if you want a new license, you've got to have empowerment partners. And the mining houses say, wait a minute, we had partners, we were empowered, but they sold up and left. Tough, replies the government. No empowerment partners, no new licenses. Now, you don't need to be a genius to work out that a rule like that, Jeremy, means mining houses would have to keep handing over 25% of their value to new partners every few years. Good for the partners, bad for the miners. And so it was off to court. And last week, the High Court ruled in favor of the miners. Once empowered, always empowered. I don't think that's the end of it. It will almost certainly be appealed. And this one looks to me like it has the Constitutional Court written all over it.
Well, let's bring in an ex-miner, chairman of AngloGold, Clem Sunter, perhaps better known as the world's foremost scenario planner.
And indeed, Clem has a new book out, Thinking the Future, New Perspectives from the Shoulders of Giants. Clem, greetings to you. Welcome to the show. Thinking the Future is an outline, a guide, if you will, to scenario planning, but you use an intriguing selection of philosophers, some ancient, some modern, to set the book up. Why have you chosen that path?
Because we've, in the past, only talked about the methodology itself and not the kind of basic philosophy behind it. So by drawing on the wisdom of Plato and Aristotle, Isaiah Berlin, and then we move on to Socrates as to why you should question every assumption you should make about the future. And then we look at the Stoic philosophers who are very clear that if you want to lead a happy life, you must distinguish between what you do control and what you don't control. And this is all against the kind of difference between Plato and Aristotle. Plato saying, you can have an ideal form for the world, and if you're a real philosopher, you can discover that ideal form. Whereas Aristotle said, actually, you've got to look at everything that's going on around you, and you've got to develop science and a real knowledge of the world, and you can change your mind as science progresses. And that was, for us, the difference between being a fox, where you adapt as more evidence comes in and you question that evidence closely, like you did, Socrates would have done, and Plato, who would have said, no, my original idea is valid, and who would have been a hedgehog. So we've tried to take some of the greatest minds in the world and show how they would naturally be scenario planners looking at multiple futures rather than a hedgehog trying to make a single forecast of the future.
Chris, I think you pick up on the foxes and the hedgehogs, because I'm starting to lose myself between Aristotle and Plato here.
Well, let's throw it straight back at Clem. A number of books of yours, Clem, have this concept of hedgehog versus fox, fox versus hedgehog. Just remind us what that's about.
Well, there was a Greek poet called Archilochus who said, "A hedgehog knows one big thing, whereas a fox knows many little things." And Isaiah Berlin, who was a philosopher in the 1960s at Oxford, wrote a famous book called The Hedgehog and the Fox, where he said there are two kinds of people who think about the future in the world. Those that think that there's one thing that's going to happen and then bet all of their reputation and money on that one thing, and foxes who basically believe that life can actually go several different directions, and therefore you have to play different possibilities at all times and then look at the intuitive probabilities around those different possibilities. And one of the reasons we wrote this book is that right now the most popular book in the world on futurology is called Super Forecasting by Philip Tetlock. And it's an American book that's been out since 2015, and it's done very well, and it's a very good book. And he also uses this hedgehog-fox distinction. He actually came up with it after we did in 1999, but he uses it to say, being a super forecaster, you've got to give probabilities to your forecast of whether it's going to come true or not. And what we've done is develop it further to say, actually, it's not about a forecast and whether it's true or not. It's about looking at different possibilities for the future of the world and then assigning probabilities to those different scenarios. So we've tried to move further than being a super forecaster. And that's one of the reasons we've written the book, because there is no popular book, really popular book on scenario planning in the world at the moment.
Clem, you've mentioned the contrast between Aristotle and Plato, but you also introduce Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, but also a noted Stoic philosopher. And you explain that the way we use in modern parlance the word Stoic, the way we use it is wrong. Why?
Most people think when you call somebody Stoic or having a stoical attitude, that they are immune to feeling sad about a really bad situation. And we try and show by direct quotes from Stoic philosophers that wasn't the whole of it. It was more that you can actually become a much more happy person if you understand what you actually control and then use that circle of what you actually control to influence the world that is out there that is partially beyond your control. So it's a much more effective way of going through life than, thinking that you're either in control of everything, which is what a lot of hedgehogs feel, or you're in control of nothing. Stoics have a very realistic opinion of, how much they actually control, and then use that to change the world around them.
Clem, for a scenario planner, one of the great names, someone that you worked with, is that of the late Pierre Wack. Where does he fit into the picture?
Well, Pierre studied under Herman Kahn, who was the person who introduced scenario planning in the United States back in 1960, when he wrote a book called On Thermonuclear War, where he posed a scenario of a flat-out conflict between the Soviet Union and America. And it was a very believable book. And indeed, it made a difference in 1962 when Russia and America nearly came to war. And, Khrushchev and Kennedy were sort of, very close to fisticuffs. And I think what he showed was the sheer destruction that a nuclear war could create. So you don't write scenarios. And he added the word planning, by the way, just to show that it wasn't a scenario of a movie in Hollywood. It was a scenario about the future. And what it showed was that scenarios are valuable not only for when they actually capture the future, but when they actually persuade people not to go ahead with a particular strategy which could enhance the probability of that scenario. And we used exactly the same technique in the mid-1980s with the high road and low road in the Anglo team. We tried to show South Africans we could either take the high road of negotiation leading to a political settlement or go the low road of increasing conflict leading to civil war in a wasteland. And so we hope that our scenarios change the probabilities in the minds of, people like F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela and others, that they should be doing things to make the high road more probable and steering away from the low road. So you actually use scenarios to shape the future.
Clem, let me end off with a final question for you. You close the book with a very detailed look at education, including 4 very distinct scenarios which apply not only to South Africa, but to many other countries too. Why, for you, is education so important?
Well, the world has changed so much. I mean, work has changed so much. In the last century, you got your matric, you got your degree, you waived your CV, you got a job with a big business, like my old business, Anglo-American. That was the way of the world. Now, with automation and artificial intelligence and everything else, children have to be far more imaginative about their futures. And we still have schools that are educating children for the past, for the kind of job market that existed in the 1970s and 80s. And so we write that final chapter as a wake-up call that we've got to use completely different curricula and also different technology, because kids can have access now to their iPhones and stuff like that. So we've got to look at a completely different way of educating children in order to prepare them for the job market of today rather than the job market of the last century.
Something very much to think about. All roads lead to Rome. All roads lead from a good education. Clem Sunter, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you. Jeremy.
Thank you, Clem. Chris, you said, as you mentioned earlier, that you're still in Germany. Finally, as Clem said to us earlier, the very important day today, because it was the voting day yesterday. Have we got a result yet?
Well, Jeremy, we do and we don't. It was always going to be close, but while the Social Democrats, left of centre, the current Deputy Chancellor Olaf Scholz, have a narrow lead over the Christian Democrats, right of centre, of Armin Laschet, and of course Angela Merkel outgoing, both sides are now saying they can put together a governing coalition. Both sides are claiming victory. What happens now is a period of horse trading. So to be honest, we won't know who is actually going to replace Angela Merkel, Chancellor for 16 years, for at least a couple of weeks, if not a couple of months. The key euro-dollar exchange rate and the euro bond yields, absolutely no movement at this stage. So the markets look pretty happy with the German election result.
Okay, and as we've said before, they're a very important partner to South Africa in the EU. So we would like to see consistency there in some form or other. Chris, thank you very much for joining us. You won't be with us next week, but you'll be back in South Africa the week after. Enjoy the rest of your trip in Germany.
Thank you, Jeremy. Always a pleasure.
Cheers. Bye-bye. And thank you to you for watching as well. You can tune in next week for another version of the Business Show on Mansfield Today, brought to you by Capital Legacy, your number one provider of wills and estate administration. Until then, goodbye.